The flight attendant's smug smile vanished when Elaine Montgomery revealed her Supreme Court justice credentials. The entire cabin froze. What had begun as a routine removal of a disruptive black family had just become a career-ending mistake. But Elaine wasn't finished teaching everyone on Flight 2507 a lesson. Before we dive into this shocking story, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you're ready to see justice served in the most unexpected way. Now let's see how this family's ordinary trip turned into a powerful moment that changed airline policy forever. The Montgomery family had been planning this trip for months. Justice Elaine Montgomery checked her watch as they approached the airline counter at Reagan National Airport. Her husband Terrence, one of the nation's top neurosurgeons at Johns Hopkins, stood beside her with their two children, 16-year-old Malcolm and 12-year-old Zoe. They were headed to Atlanta for Elaine's niece's wedding, a rare family gathering that everyone had been looking forward to. First class to Atlanta reservation under Montgomery, Elaine said, sliding her ID and credit card across the counter. The ticket agent glanced at the cards, then up at the family dressed comfortably for travel in jeans and casual shirts. Her eyebrows raised slightly as she looked back at the computer. First class. Let me double-check that for you, the agent said, typing with exaggerated care. Are you sure you're in the right line? Terrence placed a gentle hand on Elaine's back. After 20 years of marriage, he could feel her tension without seeing her face. Yes, we're certain, he said calmly. After verifying their reservation 3 times, the agent reluctantly handed over their boarding passes. Gate 22. Boarding begins in 45 minutes. Thank you, Elaine responded with professional courtesy, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. As they walked towards security, Malcolm adjusted his expensive noise-canceling headphones, a gift from his parents, after making the honor roll for the 4th consecutive semester. Remember what we talked about, Terrence said quietly to his children as they approached the TSA checkpoint. Just stay calm and follow instructions. What should have been a routine screening turned into a 15-minute ordeal. While other passengers moved swiftly through all 4, Montgomerys were pulled aside for random additional screening. Sir, where did you get these headphones? A TSA officer asked Malcolm, inspecting his Bose Quiet Comfort. They were a gift from my parents. Malcolm answered, his voice carefully controlled, despite the irritation flashing in his eyes. Pretty expensive gift, the officer remarked, turning them over before finally returning them. Zoe looked up at her mother, confusion on her young face. At 12, she was old enough to notice the disparity in treatment, but young enough to still be hurt by it. Elaine squeezed her daughter's shoulder reassuringly. It's okay, sweetheart, she whispered. Just part of travel these days. But they both knew it wasn't just part of travel. It was part of something much deeper, something that Elaine had fought against her entire career. Once, through security, the family regrouped at a quiet corner near their gate. Everyone okay? Terrence asked, his eyes doing a quick assessment of his family's emotional state. I'm fine, Dad, Malcolm said, though the tightness in his jaw suggested otherwise. Elaine checked her phone, momentarily distracted by an email from her clerk about an upcoming opinion. As a Supreme Court justice, her work never truly stopped, even on family trips. She had made history as only the 3rd black woman ever appointed to the nation's highest court, but today she was simply a mother and wife trying to travel with her family. Remember why we're going, Terrence said to everyone. Cousin Jasmine's wedding is going to be beautiful and Grandma will be there too. Let's not let anything spoil this weekend for us. Zoe nodded, her mood brightening at the thought of seeing her extended family and wearing the new dress they had bought for the occasion. When boarding began, the Montgomerys lined up with the other first-class passengers. As the gate agent scanned their boarding passes, her eyes widened slightly. Enjoy your flight, she said, her tone noticeably different than it had been with the passengers ahead of them. As they walked down the jet bridge, Elaine mentally prepared herself for the flight ahead. 20 years in the legal system, including 5 on the Supreme Court bench, had taught her to recognize the patterns of bias that pervaded everyday life. But it had also taught her when to fight and when to simply document. Today, she hoped would just be another entry in her mental catalog, not a battle. Little did she know that Flight 2507 was about to become much more than a simple trip to a family wedding. The narrow aisle of the Boeing 737 funneled the Montgomerys toward the front of the aircraft where the spacious first-class cabin awaited. Senior Flight Attendant Patricia Wilson, a 20-year veteran with the airline, stood at her post with a practiced smile that faltered momentarily as the family approached. "Welcome aboard," Patricia said, her eyes darting between their casual attire and the first-class boarding passes in their hands. The slight hesitation in her greeting didn't go unnoticed by Elaine, who had spent decades detecting the subtle indicators of bias in courtroom testimonies. "Thank you," Terrence replied, warmly guiding Zoe toward their assigned row. Malcolm stored his backpack in the overhead compartment while Elaine helped Zoe settle into her window seat in row 3. Terrence took the aisle seat beside her while Elaine and Malcolm occupied row 4. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage, Junior Flight Attendant Darren Reynolds?" asked the passengers in row 2, a middle-aged white couple who requested sparkling water with lemon. When Darren reached the Montgomerys, he smiled genuinely. "What can I get for you folks before takeoff?" "Apple juice, please," Zoe requested politely. "Orange juice for me," added Terrence. Before Darren could respond, Patricia intervened. "We'll be coming around with beverages after takeoff," she said curtly. "We need to focus on boarding right now." Darren's eyebrows furrowed slightly, but he nodded and continued down the aisle, leaving the Montgomerys without their drinks. "But they just got drinks," Zoe whispered to her father, gesturing toward row 2. "It's all right, sweetheart," Terrence replied quietly. "We'll get something soon." Behind them, Elaine observed the interaction while helping Malcolm adjust his seat. Her mind flashed back to her first year of law school, when a professor had suggested she might be more comfortable at a historically black university instead. That subtle dismissal had only hardened her resolve to excel in spaces that weren't designed with her in mind. As boarding continued, a commotion arose a few rows back. Karen Miller, a blonde woman in her 40s wearing designer travel wear, was frowning at her boarding pass. "Excuse me," she called out to Patricia. "I specifically requested a window seat. This is a middle seat." Patricia rushed over immediately. "Let me see what I can do for you, ma'am." Without hesitation, Patricia rearranged several passengers, eventually placing Karen in 5 amperes and a window seat. The efficiency with which the problem was solved stood in stark contrast to the dismissal of the Montgomery's simple beverage request. As the final boarding announcements were made, Zoe stood to retrieve her book from her backpack in the overhead bin. As she turned in the narrow space, her elbow accidentally bumped Patricia's arm. "Oh, I'm sorry," Zoe apologized immediately. Patricia's reaction was disproportionate. "You need to be more careful," she said sharply, "and please remain seated during the boarding process. We have behavior standards that all passengers must follow for safety reasons." The teenager's face flushed with embarrassment as she quickly sat down, her eyes filling with tears at the public reprimand. Terrence leaned forward. "Excuse me," he said in the measured tone he used in high-pressure operating rooms. "My daughter apologized for an accident. There's no need to speak to her that way." Patricia's lips thinned. "Sir, I'm simply enforcing safety protocols. Flight attendants are authorized to maintain order during all phases of flight." From her seat, Elaine watched the interaction with growing concern. She caught her husband's eye, giving him a subtle nod that communicated, "Let it go for now. Document everything." As the remaining passengers boarded, a tall man with salt and pepper hair paused beside Malcolm's seat. Professor Wesley Parker, constitutional law chair at Georgetown University, did a double take as he recognized Justice Montgomery. His eyes widened slightly, but noting her casual attire and family setting, he respectfully continued to his seat without making a scene. The boarding door closed, and Captain Richard Hayes's voice came over the intercom. "Flight attendants prepare for departure." As the safety demonstration began, Patricia deliberately avoided eye contact with the Montgomery family, while Darren tried to compensate with an extra friendly smile toward Zoe, who was still visibly upset by the earlier confrontation. Elaine pulled out her notebook, ostensibly to jot down wedding gift ideas, but began methodically documenting the time, names, and details of each interaction. In her decades of fighting for equality through the legal system, one lesson had proven invaluable time and again: evidence matters. Mom, Malcolm whispered, leaning across the aisle. "You're in Supreme Court mode." Elaine smiled at her perceptive son. "Just habit," she replied softly. "How are you holding up?" Malcolm shrugged. "Nothing new. Just another day being black in America." The resignation in her son's voice stirred something in Elaine's chest. At 16, he was already too familiar with the subtle indignities they were experiencing. She thought of the cases on her docket, of the systemic issues she worked to address through her jurisprudence. But in moments like these, the distance between legal theory and lived reality felt vast. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Elaine took a deep breath and centered herself. The weekend was about family, about celebrating her niece's wedding. Whatever tensions had arisen during boarding, surely they would dissipate during the short flight to Atlanta. Unfortunately for everyone on Flight 2507, the journey was just beginning. 20 minutes after takeoff, the seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft ping. Captain Hayes' voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, we're expecting some turbulence ahead. Flight attendants, please suspend service and secure the cabin. Everyone needs to return to their seats and keep those seatbelts fastened." Patricia and Darren quickly collected half-filled glasses and secured the service carts. The plane hit a pocket of rough air, causing several passengers to gasp as it dropped suddenly before stabilizing. 3 rows behind the Montgomerys, a middle-aged white businessman unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. Patricia noticed him immediately. "Sir," she said in a conversational tone, "the captain has asked everyone to remain seated due to turbulence." "Just need to grab something from the overhead," he replied. "Please make it quick," Patricia responded with an understanding smile. Elaine watched the interaction while pretending to read her book. The contrast in Patricia's demeanor compared to her earlier harshness toward Zoe was striking. After several minutes, the plane seemed to find smoother air. Zoe turned to her father with an urgent expression. "Dad, I really need to use the restroom," she whispered. Terrence checked to see if the seatbelt sign was still illuminated. It was. "Can you wait until they turn off the sign, sweetheart?" Zoe squirmed uncomfortably. "I don't think so. It's an emergency." Terrence caught Patricia's attention as she passed. "Excuse me, my daughter needs to use the restroom urgently. Is it possible for her to go quickly?" Patricia frowned. "The seatbelt sign is still on. Safety protocols require all passengers to remain seated." "I understand," Terrence replied, "but it's an emergency." "She'll have to wait," Patricia insisted before walking away. Zoe's discomfort was obvious, and Terrence shared a concerned look with Elaine across the aisle. Just then, the captain's voice returned. "Folks, looks like we've cleared that rough patch. Flight attendants, you can resume service. Passengers, you're free to move about the cabin, but keep those seatbelts fastened when seated." The seatbelt sign turned off with another ping. "Go ahead," Zoe, Terrence said, standing to let her out. Zoe quickly made her way toward the front lavatory. As she approached, Patricia stepped directly into her path, blocking access to the restroom. "Where do you think you're going?" Patricia demanded loudly. Zoe's voice came out small. "The restroom. The seatbelt sign is off now." "I didn't give you permission to get up," Patricia said. "Return to your seat immediately." Terrence, seeing his daughter's distress, unbuckled his seatbelt and approached. "Excuse me, the captain just announced we're free to move around. My daughter needs to use the restroom." Patricia turned to Terrence with a hard stare. "Sir, I need you to return to your seat as well. Your daughter was being disruptive by ignoring my previous instructions." "What previous instructions?" Terrence asked, confusion evident in his voice. "The captain just said we could move around." She attempted to get up, while the seatbelt sign was on, Patricia claimed, although Zoe had only stood up after the announcement. Malcolm, witnessing the confrontation, discreetly took out his phone and began recording. Elaine remained seated, observing carefully, while continuing to document every word in her notebook. "That's not true," Zoe protested, tears welling in her eyes from the combination of embarrassment and physical discomfort. "I only got up when Dad said I could." Several nearby passengers were now watching the interaction with uncomfortable expressions. "I don't appreciate your tone," Patricia said, her voice rising. "This kind of behavior is unacceptable." "What behavior?" Terrence asked, struggling to maintain his composure. "My daughter simply needs to use the restroom, which is her right now that the seatbelt sign is off." "You allowed another passenger to get up during turbulence, but you're preventing my 12-year-old daughter from using the restroom when it's clear." Patricia's face flushed. "Sir, do not raise your voice at me. I am responsible for safety on this aircraft, and I determine when passengers can move about the cabin." "You're not being consistent in how you apply those rules," Terrence pointed out firmly. A white passenger from row 5 interrupted. "Just let the kid use the bathroom. What's the big deal?" Patricia ignored the comment and pressed a call button on the nearby panel. "I'm going to have to ask for backup if you continue to be confrontational," she said to Terrence. "Confrontational?" Terrence repeated incredulously. "I'm advocating for my daughter's basic needs." Darren appeared in response to Patricia's call. His expression showed concern as he assessed the situation. "What's happening, Patricia?" he asked. "This family is being disruptive and challenging my authority," Patricia stated. The daughter ignored safety instructions, and now the father is becoming aggressive. "I'm not being aggressive," Terrence clarified for Darren. "My daughter needs to use the restroom. The seatbelt sign is off. Another passenger was allowed to get up during turbulence with no issue, but my daughter is being blocked now that it's clear." Malcolm continued recording, capturing Patricia's inconsistent statements and the growing tension. Several other passengers had also begun filming the confrontation on their phones. Elaine finally stood up, moving toward her husband and daughter with deliberate calm. "Darren," she addressed the junior flight attendant directly, "is there a specific airline policy that prevents passengers from using the lavatory when the seatbelt sign is off?" Darren hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "No, ma'am. Passengers are permitted to use the lavatories when the sign is off." Patricia cut in. "This isn't about the bathroom. It's about compliance with crew member instructions." "What instructions weren't followed?" Elaine pressed. "My daughter waited until the captain announced it was safe to move around. She followed the rules." By now, nearly half the first-class cabin was watching the confrontation unfold. The businessman who had been allowed to stand during turbulence looked particularly uncomfortable. "This is ridiculous," another passenger muttered audibly. Patricia turned to Darren. "Call the captain and tell him we have a situation. These passengers are disrupting the flight." As Darren hesitated, Elaine maintained her composed demeanor. "Before you do that, I'd suggest considering whether this escalation is necessary or appropriate. My family has complied with all safety regulations." "The disparate treatment we're receiving compared to other passengers is concerning." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Elaine replied evenly. "I'm making an observation about potentially discriminatory application of policies. My daughter simply needs to use the restroom, which is her right under current conditions." The tension in the cabin was palpable. Zoe stood frozen between her parents, humiliated and still in urgent need of the bathroom. Malcolm continued recording, his jaw clenched in silent fury. And around them, a plane full of passengers watched as what should have been a routine flight descended into a showcase of the exact kind of discrimination that Justice Elaine Montgomery had spent her career fighting against. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, interrupting the tense standoff. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Hayes speaking. I've been informed of a situation in the cabin. I need everyone's cooperation with our flight crew to ensure a safe and comfortable flight for all passengers." Patricia shot a triumphant look at the Montgomery family. The captain has been notified. Now I'm going to ask you all to return to your seats immediately. My daughter still needs to use the restroom. Terrence insisted, his arm protectively around Zoe's shoulders. Darren stepped forward, his discomfort evident. Patricia, maybe we should let the young lady use the facilities first and then discuss this. Patricia's eyes flashed with anger at the public contradiction. I've made my decision, Darren. This family has been non-compliant since boarding. By now, the commotion had drawn attention from passengers in the main cabin as well. Heads peeked around seats and over shoulders to witness the unfolding drama. The ground crew has been notified, Patricia announced loudly enough for nearby rows to hear. They're preparing for passenger removal before we continue to Atlanta. A collective murmur swept through the cabin. Elaine maintained her composure, though her eyes reflected a calculated intensity. Removal, Malcolm repeated, still recording. For what, exactly? For failure to comply with crew member instructions, which is a violation of federal aviation regulations, Patricia stated firmly. What specific regulation has been violated? Elaine asked calmly. I'd appreciate the exact code and subsection you're referring to. Patricia faltered momentarily before recovering. I don't have to cite specific regulations. As a flight attendant, I have the authority to determine when a passenger is being disruptive. Zoe, still caught in the middle of this confrontation, looked utterly mortified. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, I just really need to use the bathroom. Several passengers around them began openly filming now. A woman from row 7 stood up. This is ridiculous. Let the child use the restroom. Ma'am, please return to your seat, Patricia ordered. Elaine turned to address the other passengers directly. I apologize for the disruption to your flight. This situation could be resolved simply by allowing my daughter to use the facilities, which is permitted now that the seatbelt sign is off. Patricia pressed her call button again, this time holding it down longer. Security issue in first class, she spoke into her handheld phone. The cockpit door opened, and Captain Richard Hayes emerged, his expression stern as he surveyed the scene. At 58, the veteran pilot had handled numerous in-flight incidents during his career, but the tension in the cabin was palpable even to him. What seems to be the problem here, he asked, directing his question to Patricia first. Patricia quickly responded, Captain, this family has been disruptive since boarding. They've ignored safety instructions, challenged crew authority, and are refusing to comply with direct orders to return to their seats. The captain turned to the Montgomerys. Sir, ma'am, I need to ask you to return to your seat so we can continue our flight. Terrence spoke calmly but firmly. Captain, my daughter asked to use the restroom after your announcement that passengers could move about the cabin. Your flight attendant denied her for no apparent reason while allowing other passengers similar movement. We're simply asking for equal treatment. Captain Hayes looked at Patricia questioningly. The seatbelt sign is off, correct? Yes, but Patricia began. Darren finally spoke up. Captain, if I may, there seems to be a misunderstanding. The young lady waited until the seatbelt sign was off before getting up. I believe there may have been some inconsistency in how our policies were applied. Patricia's face reddened. That's completely unprofessional, Darren. You're undermining my authority in front of passengers. The captain raised a hand to quiet them both, looking increasingly concerned about the escalating situation. Let's all take a breath here. From row 8, Professor Wesley Parker stood up. Captain, if I may add something. I've been observing this situation, and there appears to be a clear disparity in how this family is being treated compared to other passengers. Sir, please return to your seat, Patricia snapped. This doesn't concern you. Actually, Wesley continued addressing the captain directly as a law professor specializing in civil rights. I feel obligated to note that what I'm witnessing raises significant concerns about discriminatory treatment. Patricia turned to the captain. These people are causing a disruption that's affecting the entire flight. I recommend we have them removed before departing the gate area. Her use of the phrase, these people, caused another murmur to ripple through the cabin. Malcolm's grip tightened on his phone as he continued recording. The captain looked increasingly uncomfortable as he assessed the situation. "Patricia, let's discuss this privately." He gestured toward the galley area. "Have you noticed how this entire conflict could have been avoided if the flight attendant had simply allowed a child to use the bathroom? Comment number 1. If you think this kind of discrimination happens more often than we realize. Drop a like if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of their appearance. Subscribe if you want to see more stories about people standing up against injustice. What would you do if you were in Elaine's position? Would you reveal your identity as a Supreme Court justice immediately, or document the discrimination first? And what do you think happens next when the captain learns who he's really dealing with? The next part of this story contains a revelation that left everyone on that plane speechless. As Captain Hayes and Patricia stepped aside for their private discussion, the tension in the cabin remained high. Passengers whispered among themselves, many still recording the scene on their phones. Zoe, given a momentary reprieve from being the center of attention, looked pleadingly at her mother. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Elaine said, softly gesturing toward the lavatory that was now unblocked. Terrence accompanied his daughter to the door, standing guard while she finally got to use the facilities. In the galley, Patricia's hushed voice carried just enough for those in the first few rows to hear fragments of her insistence that the family was being deliberately provocative and needed to be made an example of. Malcolm shook his head as he continued recording. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Elaine placed a calming hand on her son's shoulder. "Keep documenting," she instructed quietly. "But remember what we've discussed about maintaining your composure in these situations." When Zoe emerged from the lavatory looking relieved, but still visibly upset, the family regrouped near their seats, but remained standing as the captain and Patricia returned from their discussion. Captain Hayes addressed them with a more diplomatic tone. "Sir, ma'am, I apologize for the confusion. However, to avoid further disruption, the airline is requesting that your family deplane and take a later flight. We'll have you rebooked immediately, with full compensation." Gasps and murmurs spread through the cabin. Several passengers called out in protest. "That's completely unacceptable," Terrence responded firmly. "We've done nothing wrong. This is discriminatory treatment, plain and simple." "If they're being removed, you'll have to remove me too," called the woman from row 7. "I witnessed everything." "And me," added another passenger. Patricia's expression hardened. "Captain, should I call for security to assist with the removal? They can be placed on the no-fly list for refusing to comply." The situation was escalating beyond control. Elaine, who had been meticulously observing and documenting every interaction, finally decided it was time. "Captain Hayes," she said, her voice carrying the measured authority that had commanded the highest courtroom in the nation, "before you make a decision that could have serious repercussions for this airline, I believe there's something you should know." She reached into her purse and removed a small leather wallet different from the regular ID she had presented at check-in. Opening it, she revealed the official credentials identifying her as Justice Elaine Montgomery of the United States Supreme Court. "I am a sitting justice of the Supreme Court," she stated calmly. "My family and I have been subjected to discriminatory treatment from the moment we boarded this flight. I've documented every incident in detail, and my son has video evidence corroborating our experience." The captain's face went pale as he stared at the credentials. Patricia's smug expression transformed into one of shock, her mouth opening and closing without producing words. I had no idea," Captain Hayes stammered, looking genuinely mortified. "That's precisely the point," Captain Elaine responded. "No passenger should be treated differently based on their appearance or perceived status. The fact that my professional position changes how we're treated only underscores the discrimination at work here." The cabin had gone completely silent. Even those who had been absorbed in movies or sleep were now fully tuned into the extraordinary scene unfolding. Justice Montgomery, the captain, said, straightening his posture unconsciously, "I sincerely apologize for this situation. Of course, you and your family are welcome to continue on this flight." Patricia finally found her voice. "There must be some mistake. I was simply following protocol for disruptive passengers." "I believe we all witnessed what occurred," interrupted Professor Parker, who had moved closer during the revelation. "Justice Montgomery, I'm Wesley Parker, Constitutional Law at Georgetown. I'd be happy to provide a statement regarding what I observed today." Before Patricia could respond, a man in plain clothes approached from the back of the first-class cabin displaying a badge. Air Marshal Gregory Thompson, he introduced himself. "I've been monitoring the situation from my seat. Justice Montgomery, I can confirm that I observed no behavior from your family that warranted the response from the flight crew." Patricia's face had lost all color. "I was just doing my job," she insisted weakly. Darren stepped forward. "Captain, with all due respect, this isn't the first incident involving Patricia and passengers of color." His voice trembled slightly as he continued. "During our crew briefing, Patricia made comments about being vigilant with certain passengers in first class today." Patricia gasped. "That's completely false." "I heard it too," confirmed another flight attendant who had emerged from the main cabin. "I was uncomfortable with the implication, but didn't speak up. I should have." Captain Hayes looked thoroughly disturbed by these revelations. "Justice Montgomery I assure you this incident will be thoroughly investigated at the highest levels." "Patricia, I'm removing you from duty for the remainder of this flight." Patricia's face contorted with indignation. "You can't do that based on their word against mine." "It's not just their word," Malcolm said, holding up his phone. "It's all documented right here." Phones were ringing throughout the cabin as airline management scrambled to respond to the situation. A flight attendant handed Captain Hayes a phone. "It's the regional director," she whispered urgently. As the captain stepped aside to take the call, murmurs rippled through the cabin. Some passengers were typing frantically on their phones, undoubtedly sharing the incredible story on social media. Others were approaching the Montgomerys with words of support and apology. Elaine remained composed, though the slight tremor in her hands as she returned her credentials to her purse revealed the emotional toll of the confrontation. Years of training herself to remain calm in the face of injustice couldn't completely eliminate the hurt and anger that such incidents provoked. Terrence put his arm around Zoe, who leaned against him emotionally exhausted. "You okay, baby girl?" he asked softly. She nodded against his shoulder. "Is Mom in trouble for using her justice card?" Terrence smiled gently. "No, sweetheart. Your mom just reminded everyone that justice isn't just something that happens in a courtroom. Sometimes it has to happen at 300,000 feet." As the revelation of Justice Montgomery's identity continued to reverberate throughout the aircraft, the dynamics of power on Flight 2507 had irrevocably shifted. What began as a routine case of discrimination had transformed into a teaching moment that none of the passengers or crew would ever forget. Captain Hayes returned from his phone call, his expression a mixture of professionalism and barely concealed anxiety. The regional director's instructions had clearly conveyed the gravity of the situation. "Justice Montgomery," he addressed Elaine directly, "I've just spoken with our airline's regional director, Mr. Watkins. He extends his deepest apologies and assures you that this incident will be addressed at the corporate level." Patricia stood rigid near the galley, her arms crossed defensively as Darren avoided eye contact with her. The hierarchy that had seemed so clear just moments ago had completely inverted. Captain Elaine responded evenly. "I appreciate the airline's concern, but I want to be clear that my family and I don't seek special treatment. What we experience today happens to countless passengers who don't have the benefit of my credentials or platform. That's the real issue that needs addressing." The captain nodded solemnly. I understand, Your Honor. Mr. Watkins has requested to speak with you directly, if you're willing. Elaine accepted the phone. Her conversation was brief but pointed, focusing on systemic issues rather than this isolated incident. The passengers nearby could hear fragments about unconscious bias training, consistent policy enforcement, and accountability metrics. When she handed the phone back to the captain, she turned to address her family. They're placing Patricia on administrative leave, effective immediately. Darren will serve as lead attendant for the remainder of the flight. Patricia's face flushed crimson. This is completely unfair. You can't just... Patricia, Captain Hayes interrupted firmly. You're relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Please gather your personal items and prepare to deplane. We'll have a replacement flight attendant board before departure. As Patricia was escorted toward the exit, she passed Karen Miller, the passenger who had complained about her seat assignment earlier. Karen seemed to physically recoil, as if trying to distance herself from any association with the disgraced flight attendant. I had nothing to do with any of this, Karen said to no one in particular. I just wanted a window seat. Meanwhile, other passengers had begun approaching the Montgomery family with words of support and their own stories. The same thing happened to my family last month, shared an older black gentleman from the main cabin who had witnessed the incident. But we didn't have a Supreme Court justice in our party, so we were actually removed from the flight. I've got the whole thing on video, offered a college student from row 12. I'd be happy to send it to you if it helps document what happened. Professor Parker approached again. Justice Montgomery, I'd like to formally offer my statement as a witness. What occurred today was a textbook example of disparate treatment based on racial bias. Air Marshal Thompson also provided his card. I'll be filing an official report about this incident. In my 10 years as an air marshal, I've observed numerous similar situations. Your family handled this with remarkable composure. Darren, now in charge of the first-class cabin, approached with visible nervousness. Justice Montgomery. Dr. Montgomery, I want to personally apologize for not intervening sooner. The captain has asked me to ensure your family has everything you need for the remainder of the flight. Elaine regarded the young flight attendant thoughtfully. Thank you, Darren. Your eventual willingness to speak the truth, despite the professional risk, made a difference today. That takes courage. Darren lowered his voice. You should know, Patricia has done this before. There have been complaints, but somehow they never seem to result in any action. Captain Hayes returned from escorting Patricia off the plane. We'll have a replacement flight attendant boarding momentarily, and then we'll be on our way. Justice Montgomery, the airline, would like to offer your family complimentary upgrades to first class on all future flights, as well as premium membership status. Elaine shook her head. That's not necessary, Captain. We don't want preferential treatment. What we want is equal treatment for all passengers, regardless of their appearance or status. Of course, the captain responded somewhat deflated. I completely understand. As the replacement flight attendant boarded and preparations for departure resumed, the Montgomery family gathered for a private conversation about how to proceed. Should we even stay on this flight? Malcolm asked, his voice low. We could file a formal complaint and take another airline. Terrence looked to his wife. After 20 years of marriage, these decisions were always made as a partnership with respect for each other's perspectives. What do you think, Elaine? He asked. Elaine considered the question, carefully weighing multiple factors, as she did when deliberating on the bench. I think we stay, she finally decided. Leaving would send the message that we were the problem. By continuing our journey, we demonstrate resilience and reinforce that we have every right to be here. Zoe, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since using the restroom, finally spoke up. I just want to get to Cousin Jasmine's wedding, she said softly. And I don't want to be on the news or anything. Elaine stroked her daughter's hair gently. I understand, sweetheart. We'll do our best to protect your privacy through this. Malcolm put his phone away, having stopped recording once the immediate conflict was resolved. "Mom, I think you should use this. You're in a position to actually make changes happen." Elaine nodded thoughtfully at her son's observation. The incident highlighted exactly the kind of systemic issues she worked to address through her jurisprudence. The personal had become professional in an unexpected way. The new flight attendant, a woman named Sarah, approached with a warm smile. "We're ready for departure now. Can I get anyone a beverage before takeoff?" As the plane finally pushed back from the gate nearly 45 minutes behind schedule, Elaine gazed out the window at the airport terminal, reflecting on how quickly an ordinary family trip had transformed into something much more significant. The power dynamics had shifted, yes, but the larger issues remained. One incident resolved didn't change the patterns that made such incidents routine for so many families like hers. What did change, however, was her resolve to use this experience as fuel for the important work ahead, both in the courtroom and beyond. As Flight 2507 climbed to cruising altitude, an unusual atmosphere permeated the cabin. The new crew moved with exaggerated professionalism, treating every passenger with identical courtesy, while taking special care not to appear as though they were giving the Montgomerys preferential treatment. The captain's occasional announcements carried an undertone of heightened formality. Once the seatbelt sign turned off, Sarah approached the Montgomery family with a gentle smile. "Justice Montgomery, Dr. Montgomery, would you care for something to drink? We have a full selection available." After their orders were taken with impeccable courtesy, Elaine turned to Terrence in the seat beside her. They had switched places after the incident, allowing Zoe to sit with Malcolm, who was helping distract her with a game on his tablet. "We need to talk about how to handle this once we land," Elaine said quietly. "This is going to get out regardless of what we do." Terrence nodded, his expression thoughtful. As a neurosurgeon who routinely made life-altering decisions under pressure, he approached problems with methodical clarity. "The question is whether we take a formal stand or try to minimize it for the kids' sake." "That's exactly it," Elaine agreed. "Part of me wants to file a formal complaint push for systemic change, use my position to force accountability. But another part wants to protect our family from becoming a media spectacle." Terrence finished her thought. Malcolm's footage would make a compelling case, Elaine noted. But releasing it means Zoe's humiliation becomes public, and Malcolm would be thrust into a spotlight he didn't ask for. Their conversation paused as Sarah returned with their drinks, placing them carefully on their tray tables with cocktail napkins. "Thank you," Elaine said warmly. "Sarah, you're doing a wonderful job under difficult circumstances." The flight attendant's professional composure cracked slightly, revealing genuine appreciation. "Thank you, Justice Montgomery. That means a lot." After Sarah moved on to other passengers, Terrence lowered his voice further. "You know this is what you've been fighting against your entire career. The same bias that shows up in sentencing disparities and jury selection was on display today in who gets to use the bathroom without question." Elaine nodded, a familiar weight settling in her chest. "The irony isn't lost on me. I can write opinions that shape constitutional law, but can't guarantee my daughter will be treated with basic dignity on a commercial flight." She glanced across the aisle where Zoe was now sleeping against Malcolm's shoulder, emotionally exhausted from the ordeal. Her son caught her eye and gave a small nod of understanding beyond his 16 years. "Mom," he said, quietly, careful not to wake his sister. "People need to see what happened, not just hear about it, see it." "I know," Elaine acknowledged, "but I'm concerned about the impact on you and Zoe." "I'm not," Malcolm responded with conviction. "This happens every day to people who don't have Supreme Court justices for parents. At least, we can do something about it." From the row behind them, Professor Parker leaned forward respectfully. "Excuse me, Justice Montgomery. I couldn't help overhearing. If I may offer a perspective." Elaine turned slightly. Of course, Professor. What happened today exists in a legal gray area that makes accountability difficult. It's precisely the type of death by a thousand cuts discrimination that's hardest to address through traditional legal channels, Parker explained. Having documentation of a clear-cut case could provide valuable precedent. I've been thinking the same thing, Elaine admitted. The challenge is balancing the public good against my family's privacy. Their conversation was interrupted by a passenger who approached hesitantly from the main cabin. Excuse me, Justice Montgomery, my name is David Chen. I'm a civil rights attorney with the Equal Justice Initiative. I witnessed what happened, and I want you to know there are at least 20 passengers willing to provide statements. Thank you, Mr. Chen, Elaine responded. I appreciate that information. As David returned to his seat, Elaine noticed several other passengers watching their interaction. The news of her identity had clearly spread throughout the aircraft. Her phone vibrated with an incoming call, the airline CEO himself, according to the screen. Elaine declined it for now, making a note to return the call after speaking further with her family. They're in full damage control mode, Terrence observed. Yes, Elaine agreed. They're worried about a lawsuit and bad publicity. What they should be worried about, Malcolm interjected, is how many other families have been removed from flights without anyone knowing or caring. Elaine reached across the aisle to squeeze her son's hand. When did you become so wise? I had good teachers, he replied with a small smile. The flight continued with the Montgomerys receiving occasional supportive comments or notes from other passengers. Some shared their own experiences with discrimination in travel, creating an impromptu community of understanding that transcended the usual anonymity of air travel. As they began their descent into Atlanta, Elaine had made her decision. This incident, painful as it was, provided an opportunity to address systemic issues that affected countless travelers who lacked her platform and protection. I think we need to be strategic, she told Terrence. Not a lawsuit that would make it about money and individual blame. Instead, we use Malcolm's footage, selectively focus on policy changes, and protect Zoe's privacy as much as possible. Terrence nodded in agreement. A teaching moment rather than a punitive one. Exactly, Elaine confirmed. We don't need Patricia fired as much as we need every flight attendant properly trained and held accountable. As the plane's wheels touched down in Atlanta, the Montgomery family had transformed what could have been simply a traumatic experience into the beginning of something potentially meaningful. The deeper issues of bias, power, accountability, and justice that Elaine grappled with professionally had manifested in their personal lives, creating an unexpected bridge between her work on the bench and the lived experiences that informed her jurisprudence. The seatbelt sign turned off for the final time on Flight 2507, but the journey toward addressing the inequities it had exposed was just beginning. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport bustled with its usual frenetic energy as Flight 2507 taxied to the gate. Through the aircraft windows, the Montgomery family could see an unusual, welcoming committee assembled on the jetway. 3 suits identifiable as airline executives by their badges, accompanied by 2 individuals with airport security insignia. Looks like we've got a reception, Terrence observed. Captain Hayes's voice came over the intercom one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Atlanta. Local time is 2:45 p.m. with clear skies and a temperature of 82 degrees. We ask that you remain seated while we complete the arrival process. Thank you for your patience during today's unusual circumstances. As the aircraft doors opened, the captain himself emerged from the cockpit to speak quietly with the Montgomery family. Justice Montgomery airline executives are waiting to speak with you. They've arranged a private room if you'd prefer to avoid the main terminal. Elaine glanced at Zoe, who looked apprehensive about facing more attention. Thank you, Captain. We'd appreciate some privacy. As the family gathered their belongings, other passengers offered supportive comments and contact information. Professor Parker handed Elaine his card with a handwritten note on the back. For whatever you decide to do next, he said respectfully. The executives greeted the family with practiced corporate contrition as they deplaned. Justice Montgomery. I'm Edward Barnes, Regional VP of Customer Experience. This is our Chief Compliance Officer, Vanessa Wright, and our Director of Flight Operations, James Lawson. We can't express enough how deeply we regret today's incident. Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere less public, Elaine suggested, noting several passengers filming with their phones. They were escorted through a staff corridor to a private conference room typically reserved for high-level airline meetings. Zoe and Malcolm exchanged glances, both uncomfortable with the special treatment that came as a direct result of their mother's position. Once seated in the tastefully appointed room, Edward Barnes launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. Justice Montgomery, on behalf of the entire airline, I want to extend our sincerest apologies for the treatment your family experienced. We've already placed Flight Attendant Wilson on administrative leave pending a full investigation, and we're prepared to offer your family comprehensive compensation, including lifetime premium status, travel vouchers, and… Elaine raised her hand, interrupting the executive mid-sentence. Mr. Barnes, I appreciate your prompt response, but I'm not interested in preferential treatment or financial incentives. The executives exchanged nervous glances. What I am interested in, Elaine continued, is substantive change in how your airline addresses bias in customer service. My family isn't the first to experience this treatment, but we're among the few with enough power and documentation to demand accountability. Terrence placed Malcolm's phone on the conference table. My son recorded the entire incident. The footage clearly shows disparate treatment based on race. The color drained from Barnes's face as he eyed the phone. Of course, we take these allegations extremely seriously. They're not allegations, Malcolm stated firmly. It's documented evidence. Vanessa Wright, the compliance officer, leaned forward. Justice Montgomery, what specifically would you like to see happen here? I don't want Flight Attendant Wilson fired as a scapegoat while your systemic issues remain unaddressed, Elaine responded. I want comprehensive anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, clear protocols for handling passenger needs that eliminate discretionary bias, transparent reporting of removal incidents broken down by race and gender, and an NEMARF, independent audit of your diversity and inclusion practices. The executives appeared surprised by the specificity of her demands, clearly having expected a traditional complaint focused on individual punishment and compensation. Those are substantial requests, Barnes said carefully. They're necessary changes, Elaine corrected, and they're considerably less costly than the alternative. The alternative, James Lawson asked. The alternative, where my son's video becomes public, where I speak openly about our experience, and where your airline becomes the case study for transportation discrimination in America, Elaine stated calmly. I'd prefer collaboration over confrontation, but I'm prepared for either approach. The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation sank in. A Supreme Court justice with video evidence of racial discrimination was not an adversary any corporation wanted. We'll need to consult with our CEO and legal team, Barnes finally said. Of course, Elaine agreed. I'll expect your response within 48 hours. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a family wedding to attend. As the family was escorted to their waiting car, Terrence squeezed Elaine's hand. That was impressive, counselor. Just doing my job, she replied with a small smile. Their driver navigated Atlanta's busy streets as the family processed the whirlwind of events. Zoe, who had remained quiet during the meeting with the executives, finally spoke up. Mom, are we going to be on the news? Elaine turned to her daughter, recognizing the vulnerability in her question. Not if you don't want to be, sweetheart. We can protect your privacy through this. It's just… Zoe hesitated. Some of my friends might see it. Malcolm put his arm around his sister's shoulders. And they'll see that you stood up to injustice. That's nothing to be ashamed of. The The car pulled up to the elegant Peachtree Hotel, where the wedding festivities were already underway. As they entered the lobby, they were immediately embraced by Elaine's sister, Carmen, the mother of the bride. "You're finally here. We were getting worried when you didn't answer your phones," Carmen exclaimed, before noticing their solemn expressions. "What happened? Is everything okay?" They moved to a quiet corner of the lobby, where Elaine briefly recounted the incident. Carmen's expression shifted from shock to anger to sad resignation. "In 2023, we're still dealing with this," she muttered. "Wait until Mom hears." As if summoned by her name, Grandma Josephine appeared, leaning slightly on her cane, but still carrying herself with the dignity and strength that had guided the family through generations of struggle and triumph. "There are my babies," she announced, embracing each family member. When she reached Elaine, she held on a little longer. "I hear you had some trouble on that plane." "News travels fast," Elaine remarked with a raised eyebrow. "Your cousin Marcus works ground crew at the airport," Josephine explained. "Called me right away." The family retreated to a private suite to change for the rehearsal dinner, but not before Grandma Josephine pulled Elaine aside. "You know, in 1962, they removed me from a Greyhound bus in Tennessee for sitting in the wrong section," she revealed quietly. "No Supreme Court justice stepped in for me then." Elaine felt the weight of her grandmother's words, both the history they carried and the responsibility they conferred. "What would you have me do, Grandma?" she asked, genuinely seeking the wisdom of a woman who had navigated far more treacherous waters. Josephine patted her granddaughter's hand. "What you always do, baby. Use your position to make the path a little easier for those coming behind you." As the family prepared to join the wedding celebration, Elaine's phone buzzed with a notification. The airline CEO himself was requesting a virtual meeting for the following morning. The wheels of accountability had begun to turn, driven by the unique leverage her position provided. A privilege she recognized came with profound responsibility. The incident on Flight 2507 would need to be addressed, but for tonight, they would celebrate love and family. Tomorrow would be soon enough to continue their fight for justice. 6 months after the incident, on Flight 2507, Justice Elaine Montgomery stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the National Transportation Equity Conference in Washington, D.C. The audience, a mix of industry executives, policymakers, civil rights advocates, and legal scholars, listened with rapt attention as she delivered the keynote address. Transportation has always been a frontier for civil rights in America. Elaine stated, her voice carrying the measured authority that had become her trademark on the bench. From Plessy versus Fraiche, Ferguson to the Montgomery bus, boycott to the freedom rides, the question of who can move freely through public spaces has consistently revealed the gap between our stated values and lived realities. She paused, surveying the room, before continuing. 6 months ago, my family experienced firsthand how bias can manifest in modern transportation systems. What made our experience unusual was not that it happened, but that we possessed the power and platform to demand accountability. In the front row, Terrence sat proudly beside Malcolm and Zoe. Their decision to selectively share Malcolm's footage with Zoe's face blurred and identity protected had transformed a painful personal incident into a catalyst for industry-wide change. The response from national airlines has been commendable. Elaine acknowledged, nodding toward the company's new chief diversity officer, who was present at the conference. Their willingness to transform an incident of discrimination into an opportunity for systemic improvement sets a standard for corporate responsibility. What Elaine didn't mention was the behind-the-scenes negotiation that had preceded this transformation. The airline's initial attempts to minimize the incident, the threat of legal action, and the turning point when the Dischen Reservarman CEO finally understood that no amount of damage control could substitute for genuine reform. After the keynote, the family was approached by Darren Reynolds, the junior flight attendant, who had demonstrated moral courage during the incident. His name badge now identified him as Training Coordinator, Diversity and Inclusion. Justice Montgomery. Dr. Montgomery. He greeted them with genuine warmth. "It's wonderful to see your family again, under better circumstances." "Congratulations on your promotion, Darren," Terrence responded, shaking his hand. "Thank you, sir. It's been an incredible opportunity to help reshape our training programs," Darren said. "We've completely revamped how we prepare flight attendants to handle passenger needs equitably. Your family's experience has become a case study in our curriculum." Malcolm, now sporting a college acceptance letter from Yale's pre-law program, asked, "What happened with Patricia Wilson?" "If you can say," Darren nodded. "She filed a wrongful termination suit claiming she was being scapegoated, but it was dismissed when evidence emerged of previous discriminatory incidents that had been swept under the rug. The arbitration revealed a pattern that couldn't be ignored." Across the room, Edward Barnes approached with uncharacteristic humility. "Justice Montgomery, your family's experience has transformed our company culture. Our customer removal incidents are down 68% overall, with the racial disparity gap nearly eliminated." "That's encouraging progress," Mr. Barnes-Elaine acknowledged. "We're also supporting the Transportation Equity Act that's currently moving through Congress," he added. "It would require all airlines to implement the same standards your case inspired at National." The legislation he referred to, informally known as the Montgomery Standards, among industry insiders, would mandate bias training, transparent reporting of passenger removal incidents, and independent oversight of airline practices across the country. Later that evening, as the family returned to their Washington home, Zoe shared some news of her own. "I started an advocacy group at school," she announced somewhat shyly. "We're called Students for Equitable Treatment. We're focusing on discrimination in school discipline policies." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Elaine said, feeling a surge of pride at her daughter's resilience and growth. What could have been merely a traumatic experience had instead inspired Zoe to become an advocate in her own right. "How many members do you have?" Terrence asked. 23 so far," Zoe answered. "We're meeting with the principal next week to present our research on how dress code violations are enforced differently depending on race." Malcolm grinned at his sister. "Look at you following in Mom's footsteps." 1 year to the day after the incident, the Montgomery family found themselves at Reagan National Airport, once again preparing to board a flight to Atlanta for another family gathering. The changes were immediately apparent, from the diversity of the gate agents to the clearly posted passenger rights information to the professional courtesy extended to all travelers, regardless of appearance. As they settled into their seats, a flight attendant approached with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, folks. My name is Michael, and I'll be taking care of you today. Our captain has indicated a flight time of 1 hour and 40 minutes to Atlanta. Is there anything you need before we prepare for departure?" "No, thank you. We're all set," Elaine responded, noting the difference in atmosphere from their previous journey. Once airborne, Terrence turned to his wife. "Quite a difference a year makes." "Progress," Elaine agreed, though her expression remained thoughtful. "But we both know how much work remains." As a jurist, Elaine Montgomery had always understood that justice was an ongoing process rather than a destination. Her family's experience had reinforced that understanding, while also reminding her of the human stories behind every legal principle she upheld from the bench. The incident on Flight 2507 would never be erased from their family narrative. It had changed them individually and collectively, teaching Malcolm about advocacy through documentation, showing Zoe the importance of speaking truth to power, reminding Terrence of the resilience he'd cultivated across decades of navigating predominantly white spaces, and connecting Elaine more personally to the legal principles she upheld professionally. Most importantly, it had transformed a private injury into a public good, creating ripple effects that would benefit countless travelers who would never know the Montgomery family by name, but would experience more equitable treatment because of their stand. As the plane cruised at 3,000 feet, Elaine gazed out the window at the patchwork landscape of America, below a nation still striving, however imperfectly, to deliver on its founding promise of justice for all. The work continued both in grand courtrooms and on ordinary commercial flights, one case and one conscience at a time. This powerful story highlights several crucial truths about discrimination in modern America. First, bias doesn't disappear with professional achievement. Even Supreme Court justices face racial prejudice when their status isn't visible. Second, the burden of proof falls unfairly on those experiencing discrimination, making documentation essential. Malcolm's quick thinking to record the incident provided irrefutable evidence that words alone couldn't convey. Third, speaking truth to power requires both courage and strategy. The Montgomery family didn't just react emotionally. They leveraged their unique position to create lasting change beyond their individual case. Fourth, true justice isn't about punishment but transformation. Elaine didn't seek Patricia's termination, but systemic reform that would benefit countless future travelers. Perhaps most importantly, this story reveals how privilege operates in America. The same discriminatory treatment that led to the Montgomery's confrontation results in countless others being removed from flights without recourse. The difference wasn't the incident itself, but the family's exceptional ability to demand accountability. Have you ever witnessed discrimination like what happened to the Montgomery family? Would you have the courage to speak up, or would fear keep you silent? Share your thoughts in the comments about whether you believe these incidents are isolated or part of a larger pattern in our society. If this story about confronting racism resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more content that examines difficult social issues with nuance and depth. Share this video with someone who might need to understand how discrimination affects even the most accomplished Americans. Thank you for joining this important conversation about justice, accountability, and the ongoing work of building a more equitable society. Remember that each of us has the power to document, speak up, and demand better, even when we don't wear judicial robes.